If a student needs to make money because that's an important piece to help contribute to their household, why aren't they in an internship or an apprenticeship that pays? Internships should be paid if they're providing a value back to the organization, and we should be setting those up to do so. So why wouldn't we take the opportunity to help a student make a connection that can totally help them change and move out of their socioeconomic status that they are growing up in? Yeah. And so that is my frustration with working is we're seeing it as a checkbox because it is hard to set up an internship, because it is difficult to set up an apprenticeship. But we can find ways to make those connections and make them work so we can help students upskill and set them up for success. I mean, we know what's coming. We know that students and we know employees are going to need higher skills in order to make a livable wage. So why would we turn our head on them now when we have the opportunity? And just because we set up a student with an internship doesn't mean they're going to all turn into employment opportunities long term. But I think it's one of those, we're setting students up for a success with a network and opportunities to develop those skills and determine what comes next.
You are listening to the Global CTE podcast with your host, Sylvester Chisom.
Welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Global CTE podcast. I'm your host, Sylvester Chisom, and this is the place where we like to wrap a blanket of goodwill around our CTE community, and I interview the best, the brightest, the movers, the shakers, and the innovators. Today is no different. We are in for a treat. I have my good friend, Kristy Volesky, here with us. Now, let me tell you about Kristy. She's a passionate advocate for education with over 20 years of experience in work-based learning. Kristy is a national leader in developing effective internship programs and connecting education with business and community partners to address local needs. She serves on the ACTE Work-Based Learning Policy Team, co-leads a state network for the Coalition for Career Development Network, and her book, Transformational Work-Based Learning, equips coordinators to build impactful programs that truly empower students. Kristy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Super excited to have you on the pod. I just keep seeing that beautiful book cover pop up on my LinkedIn about work-based learning. I'm like, if I see another one of my friends or education influencer post this and I don't talk to Kristy, then I'm just not doing the right thing.
Oh, that's really kind of you.
So excited to dive into all the things work-based learning. I know you're an expert in that space, but before we get into that, how do you get here? What's your origin story?
Well, I mean, you said it a little bit in the bio, but started out as a practitioner. So in the field as a business educator, then transitioned into a work-based learning coordinator, found myself with an opportunity to impact state level progress. So as a state level consultant overseeing work-based learning. Mm-hmm. And then through that work, I got connected with several different people nationally and then dove into that work of strategizing and supporting for schools and colleges across the nation. Mm-hmm. And it really is that practitioner level daily struggle that really helps empower and navigate the different barriers to support schools and colleges today.
I like that. So you start from the practitioner approach, and now you're helping school systems and state levels around the country with work-based learning programs. So just to level set, how do you define work-based learning? For anyone who's listening, like I kind of know, but like let's set some ground rules here. How do you define work-based learning?
I define work-based learning as that really that collaborative learning between businesses and educators that's defined with learning before, during, and after that directly connects students to industry professionals and helps build student skills. Meaning every experience is checking all the boxes, not just some of the boxes. And that's all based off of research. Brookings Research Policy had put out a great report in 2020, but so much of the research internationally with career readiness and career planning that's coming out of OECD level sets the importance of how we approach work-based learning just like that. And I know that that's kind of a unique perspective because there's a hodgepodge of how it's being approached across the nation. But if we really take an educational approach to it, it makes sense. Like if we're really diving into how we're developing out those experiences, we're providing students with the best potential successful outcome.
What are you just brought it up internationally? Like what are you seeing, or what's that conversation looking like around work-based learning?
Well, it's all different, and it gets people get stuck on the word work. And so they obviously automatically think that means that the student has to be working, but it is called work-based. So it's based off of work, but there's a learning element involved. I would say internationally, they call it a lot of different things so that they don't infringe or people don't get like hung up on that. But when you're really looking at what is the purpose of what it is that we're doing, it's not only to build skills, but that value added of connecting students with professionals and careers that they wouldn't otherwise have access to, and really connecting the dots on how do they move that work forward. Is it something that they're interested in? If so, what's the next step? Mm-hmm. And really, when we come back to it, career planning is the root of every decision that we make, whether you're going to college after you graduate high school or not. Like, you need to know what is the career path that you're interested in and what makes the most sense based off of that career path of interest.
I'm curious, as you're talking, I keep thinking, I want to know who are some bright spots across the country, school districts or school systems or organizations you're seeing who you feel like are doing it the right way, that are good examples for us to take a look at.
I don't have their permission just right now, but I will say that I think there's a lot of school districts and colleges that are doing really great things in pockets. I don't know that I've really seen the full continuum, the full implementation. And some of that's based off of state policy where they are very limiting on what is work-based learning. But when schools are really taking a look at how many experiences they're providing and then connecting that back to that career planning piece, providing students with the greatest opportunities available to move the needle forward.
Do you feel like there's a magic number, or like how many of these experiences do you feel like students should be having as it relates to work-based learning?
I think that's really hard for me to put a number and a limit on, because I mean, think about, how many careers do we connect students to before we say, well, that's it, pick from those opportunities. And that's again, tying it back to research I haven't talked about, but one of the key pieces of research that I read by OECD, which just nails it in a quote: students cannot be what they cannot see. So if we're not making those connections for students, at the end of the day, they have found that the students are going back to what are the adults in their households doing? And they have about 4 careers in mind. So then I have to question, what are we doing in education if we're not intentionally bridging that gap and making those connections for students? So I would say as many as possible. I would love to see the data, but there's no data really yet on what schools are doing and how many different careers students are being connected to. And are all students getting those connections, or is it just a select few based off of some of the courses that they take? So I know we're focused on CTE here, but it needs to go beyond CTE. Start with CTE, but don't end with CTE. We really need to be going all the way down to provide as many connections as possible. At the same time, I do want to point out that we're not asking kindergartners to decide. That's so inappropriate. Or 8th graders at 13 and 14 to make these full-fledged career commitments. I don't philosophically believe in that. I believe in providing as many opportunities as possible for students to be able to connect with different careers. And even the new advanced CTE career clusters is really that ability to move and connect between different pathways and create new pathways, because we know that new opportunities are always emerging.
I love that you mentioned that new career pathways from that standpoint, and really keeping the student at the center of it. And I think what you said really speaks to that. That's something I love, and I speak on that a lot about what you see, you want to be. And that early exposure, it's just like, it's so critical to either for a person to find themselves in the work, or to say like, you know what, absolutely not. That's not for me. And I think both are equally valuable in that way.
Right. And then even thinking about like, what careers are we connecting students to? Are these careers that students will be able to make a livable wage and move out of their household home, or are they going to be stuck at home because this is it? And it's not going to be a wage that goes much higher, and they can't live off of that. So really being thoughtful about what are we connecting students to, what opportunities exist, and what is the future of those particular careers as well.
From a foundational standpoint, if someone's like, okay, you know what, we're starting from scratch, we're going to build this thing to be the highest level of execution for work-based learning, where do you start?
Start with what you have. That's what I tell everybody. You're already doing something very similar, but you just need to make a few tweaks to it. So collecting inventory. What are you doing and where that's close? Maybe you're missing that connection with an actual industry partner. Maybe you're missing the element of preparing, learn before the experience and then doing some sort of reflection afterwards. But gather that information on what you're doing and where, so then you can make some informed decisions. So, for example, in education, we don't often think about promoting our own career path, just assume that because students go through it, they'll make that decision. But we often have these opportunities for literacy purposes in elementary. We'll have maybe a fifth grade or fourth or fifth grade class paired up with a kindergarten or first grade class to go read to each other. So they're paired up. And so the older students are actually providing that readings for the younger students to be able to listen, and then being supportive as the younger students read back something that they're reading. It's just a great practice and something different. But what if we took that and then added in somebody who loves teaching? I love my job and I love this district, and I'm going to tell you why. And meeting with those older students after the experience and really connecting and bridging that gap. We're preparing the students before they go. We have clear expectations of learning during the experience. We've planned this out. We have maybe some reflection, or maybe we need to add a piece in there, but we haven't connected to somebody in the profession intentionally. So bringing in that piece of it really transforms the experience. And then what are they learning in the process? Well, the skills that they're learning are a lot of the communication skills. They're also learning a lot about patience and understanding, and then learning also about the career. Again, that is something that already exists, and you just make a minor change and it dramatically impacts. It closes the loop of the question of, what am I even doing here? Like, what does this even mean? Well, there's a profession of teaching. We need more teachers. This is why I love my job. Consider it.
Yeah, one of our, based in St. Louis, and one of our school districts here that I work with, they started a work-based learning program with different career options, and they added that teaching strand to it, and it has been very successful. But it's funny how you say that. Like, it's like, oh no, well they're just going through school. They don't need to know about being a teacher. But it's super important if we want that next generation of teachers who are passionate about the profession, for sure. I want to dig in on something that as I was doing my research, I was on your YouTube channel and I noticed one video that I really enjoyed the most. Work is not work-based learning. Can you please break that down for me? Because I know some people don't necessarily understand it from that perspective.
Well, the title of work-based learning, as I mentioned earlier, does create a little bit of confusion. But think about what working is, and then think about what working means for our students, whether they're in K-12 or, high school, or they're in college. How did they get that position?
Right.
Did they need you? Is this a position that they could already get? What does the advancement look like for that? Is this actually a career of interest? And so one of my greatest frustrations is how much students need those connections to careers to realize that these students cannot be what they cannot see. So if a student could obtain a part-time job on their own, and we are essentially saying, well, that's as good as you're going to get, we're sending the message that that's all you're good for. And when we are just checking the box, that's what it is. It's checking the box with having a student go work for whatever reason we've come up with, helps them get across the graduation stage. But then what happens next? And I say that with sincerity, because not only are we seeing those connections and how social mobility is limited when we aren't connecting students in high school. There's research that shows students will not be able to move out of their socioeconomic status that they had as children unless there's some sort of an intervention made. But also I saw it firsthand as a teacher. I mentioned that I was a work-based learning coordinator, but when I was first hired, we had a program called cooperative work. Who in the field knows what cooperative work is? I mean, it was something shared in CTE, but even then it was somewhat limiting.
Right.
And what it had become was students worked a part-time job. They earned credit. A lot of them were credit deficient, and they walked across that stage. Several years later, I noticed a trend. Many of these students were still in those part-time jobs or switched to other entry-level jobs. And why? They still in these jobs that they hated because they didn't have the connections. And so if we as schools and colleges are just checking the box in jobs that students can already get on their own, we are missing an opportunity to change a student's life. If a student needs to make money because that's an important piece to help contribute to their household, why aren't they in an internship or an apprenticeship that pays? Internships should be paid if they're providing a value back to the organization, and we should be setting those up to do so. So why wouldn't we take the opportunity to help a student make a connection that can totally help them change and move out of their socioeconomic status that they are growing up in? Yeah. And so that is my frustration with working is we're seeing it as a checkbox because it is hard to set up an internship, because it is difficult to set up an apprenticeship, but we can find ways to make those connections and make them work so we can help students upskill and set them up for success. I mean, we know what's coming. We know that students and we know employees are going to need higher skills in order to make a livable wage. So why would we turn our head on them now when we have the opportunity? And just because we set up a student with an internship doesn't mean they're going to all turn into employment opportunities long term. But I think it's one of those, we're setting students up for a success with a network and opportunities to develop those skills and determine what comes next. And I would also say, would you put your most advantaged students in a work credit position, or are we targeting certain populations because it's easy? And I would just say, let's not allow a system of privilege to quality work-based learning to really transform student lives. Let's rethink about how we're engaging all of our students to set them up for long-term success.
Wow. We could just stop the episode right there. I mean, that's so powerful, Kristy, what you just said. And I don't know if everyone's thinking about it from that depth, what you just said, especially thinking about the impact on the potential of, economic upward mobility. And as I'm seeing it, when we move from work to work-based learning, we're offering the network, we're offering a variety of skill attainment opportunities. So it's not just locked into customer service position or something like that. That's powerful. Now you brought it up, so I want to move to it. You talked about internships, and this brings me to the book, Transformational Work-Based Learning, Leading Exceptional Internship Programs. I have my copy right here in front of me. Phenomenal book. I encourage everyone who's listening to grab a copy on Amazon. Now, the key word I want to focus on in the title is not just work-based learning, but leading exceptional internships. How do we create exceptional internship programs?
It's a collaborative effort from both education and business. A common issue, because it is time consuming and it is work to get things started, is we don't offer time for our educators overseeing it. And this is at both the high school and the college level, is we kind of just send them off to business and industry, cross our fingers and hope for the best. But the fact is our business partners need our support and our students need our advocacy to help build those experiences. So, I mean, it's hard for me to nail down just one piece because it is complicated. And especially when we're looking at high school internship programs, working with minors, but how are we setting students up for success? How are we eliminating the assumption that every student comes from a household where not only the adults are talking to them and demonstrating quality behavior and how to maintain employment, but having intentional conversations on how to be successful in a professional setting? So let's not make that assumption. Let's provide those opportunities adjacent to the experience, saying that we've sprinkled it throughout their career. it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything until it's in your face, and they've got to be doing that. So setting students up for success, preparing them ahead of time, being highly visible where we are showing up to support our business partners, because they're going to have questions of, how do I handle this? What happens next? As well as our students, we care about them. We advocate for them. Maybe they haven't gotten to the projects that were promised and they're frustrated and they don't know what their role is. Well, part of the role as the educator is to advocate for those students and to prompt the businesses to provide those opportunities. Are there barriers that we didn't know about that we can help them navigate? So being visible is another piece of it. Yeah. And clearly articulating those goals, training plans, training agreements. I know I mentioned both, but that training plan is key on identifying what those intended outcomes are so that we can start to assess the progress that is being made towards those goals. And if those goals need to be adjusted for whatever reason, something has shifted or changed or became apparent, so be it. But that's a living document that demonstrates the growth and opportunity and communicates expectations to all the parties that are involved. So exceptional is not just hoping for the best and sending them out. It's guided support along the way. Yeah. And being able to be responsive. It's hard. It is really hard. And that's the purpose for writing the book, is there's just so many nuances that can come up. I wanted something that would be quick and easy for consumption. And then, hey, you want to see? I failed. I fell on my face a few times and several times. Learn from my mistakes. Here's how I approached it. You want to take a different way? That's fine. But that's usually the biggest obstacle to overcome, is there's just nothing like this. There's no real training that typically is seen before they're in these positions. And the training across the United States and different states varies. And some of it is pretty minor and small. So there's a lot of times where coordinators feel like they're on an island. I don't know how to do this. I have 1,000 questions, but I'm afraid to ask because what others might think of me. Well, here's a quick and easy way to look up most of those things and how to navigate those opportunities, how to mitigate different situations to help make sure you're not burning bridges, but also creating a system level of support for you as a coordinator so you don't feel like you're isolated and alone.
It's this book is very well done. You're hitting on a lot of important topics to answer those questions that someone may have, to share your insights. One thing that we know is a reality, like you said, sometimes you're going to fail, sometimes you're going to bump your head. Chapter 12 for me, managing tough days. Mm-hmm. On page 148, you talk about the lessons learned from one of those tough days being losing a student being terminated or removed from an internship program. Can you take us back to that moment and maybe share some perspective for someone on how to handle that? Because that is sometimes a part of that reality. And how do you manage that relationship with the employer and with the student? Can you take us there?
Yeah. All of my examples were actually summarized, sometimes multiple examples, especially when it came to students. I didn't want any one student to be able to recognize their situation. And I unfortunately had several students that were terminated. But hopefully leading up to the process, there were some cues that could be picked up on and different interventions made. I know for some, I would hold meetings with the student first, and then to try and allow them to become the young adult that they are and to manage the situation. Other times I had to involve parents and administrators or counselors in the situations. Other times, the situations were so dramatic that the termination, the relationship was severed on the spot. And we just had to figure out how to navigate those next days. And as I indicated, like there's some times where, the business partner is so burned by the situation. There's nothing that you could have done as the coordinator to anticipate some of that. And they just need some time to either grieve and move on, or be willing to give another chance. Or if it was so bad, it's done for a period of time. Hope is that, when you come in those situations as the coordinator, and I know I talk about in the book, it's hard not to take it personally. Like, clearly I did something wrong. Clearly I was part of the equation, and knowing that there's only so much you can do as a coordinator, and businesses know that, but being willing to to do whatever it takes, demonstrate your willingness to help support the situation. In some of the situations where students were terminated, the relationship was actually not severed because of my willingness to go on site, because of my willingness to have multiple interventions and supportive pieces, and that they saw some turnarounds, but then inevitably things shifted back and they had to just end the relationship. At the same time, not every bad situation that came up resulted in a termination, but those are just tough pills to swallow. I mean, it really is. It's really hard to see that situation transpire. At the same time, what a wonderful support network for learning an important lesson as a student intern. There were several times that throughout these situations, it was a life lesson. There are times in life when you make mistakes and you make choices that are really this bad and not good, that there are consequences, that it's not just this give and take all the time. Sometimes you're done and that's over. So, I hope I kind of answered your question there correctly.
I think you did. And I think it's helpful because it is part of the reality. I know I hear it from talking to people who are running work-based learning programs or coordinators or leading the internship program. Sometimes it's just not a good fit, or it doesn't work out for one reason or another. Like you said, there are definitely some things you can do on the prep side, to try to help make sure it's a good fit, or the student's prepared, or the employer has the right level of expectations of what they're receiving in terms of their intern. I think all of that matters. I know in our pre-show conversation, we kind of talked a little about this. How do we integrate work-based learning and career planning? Because I think there's a component here to talk about.
Yeah. Before we move on to that, I do want to point out that adults get fired. So if anybody's listening to this and thinking that this is just a kid problem, like, we know adults get fired too. So, okay. Anyway. No, that is. I don't want anybody to write off that this is a reason to not offer work-based learning, because
it's not right. You're 100%.
It's the reality. There's adults that get fired too.
Yeah. And I think, like, let's just stay there for a minute. Hold on my question. Yeah. I think that's an important reality that probably most people, for one reason or another, like, I think when I was in high school, I had a job at Wendy's or something. And I think my cousin was the assistant manager, and the manager didn't like my cousin. And I worked 1 week and I got fired, I think, because of him, but it's like, wow, this is what that feels like. But there were lessons in that, like you're saying, even for me, as I'm thinking about it now, like understanding the power of workplace dynamics, relationships, and, how you manage all of those different things. There were some things for me to take away. Well, like you said, for a student who has an issue, if it was on a student, like, you have to work on coming to work on time. You can't everyone's not waiting on you. So, like, that's something. It helps you to see yourself and the opportunities for improvement if that's the situation there.
Well, and I mean, how many adults do we know who go from job to job and get fired and always think it's someone else's fault? I mean, here is an opportunity, if it does happen, that let's have a conversation about that. Like, what could have happened differently? And at the same time, there was many situations over the years where I had to make a call and say, you know what, I just don't want the student in this work environment anymore. A different work environment, because this is just not a conducive or positive environment where I have some direct concerns. And those were not taken lightly. Those were conversations with the student and the parent and the administrator about, like, I'm going to find you something different, but I think we need to pull you from the situation as well. And
Kristy, you're saying that from the side of, like, the perspective of the employer is not providing what we expect, is not being held up to our standard of excellence.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not for whatever reason, because adults have issues too. Right. That it's not a good environment for learning. It's not conducive to the expectations, or there's been something done on the employer's part that is just not okay. So, and it's one of those where it wasn't apparent at the beginning, but as the student has been there, like, that's unacceptable. So we need to find something different.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think it speaks to paying attention to both sides. How we preparing our students for the experience, and then making sure we're finding high quality experiences, and they're maintaining our standard, and having a level of advocacy for your students, the parents or whatever, that helps to maintain and build that trust with the program, with the students, with the parents. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was good. All right, now we're off of you being fired. Okay, it happens. Keep moving forward. Let's talk about work-based learning and career planning integration. Your thoughts around that and how we can advance it.
Yeah, so this is really something I am pursuing to really help and support the field. We know that there is a limitation on people in every occupation, right? And so we have traditionally relied on career planning for counselors to fill the role. But the counselor ratios are awful across the nation. I mean, even the recommended one, 250 to one counselor, 250 students to one counselor that ASCA recommends, is still a lot to do all of those career planning pieces. We've also heavily relied on colleges to do this, but we know not every kid goes to college. And we also want students to have an idea before they go to college. We need to make sure that that college that they're choosing makes sense based off of their career plans or ideas, not just go figure it out. That's not the mentality anymore. And then the third party we've relied on are the adults in the students' lives, and how many of those adults have all the information that they need to help their student inform decisions. And so when we really take a look at work-based learning, we've traditionally said, like, well, they'll just get something out of it. But how many times are we taking students somewhere and they're like, wow, that was a fun day off. I'm going to go back to school tomorrow. I had fun today. Like, that's great that they had fun. What did they learn? And part of the piece is, when I'm talking about that learning that happens before, during, and after, that after piece is key. It doesn't have to be complex. It could be complex, like a project, but it could be as simple as a think, pair, share. Turn to a partner. What's something you enjoyed? Getting a student to pause and reflect on, well, what does this mean for me? Did I not like it? Wow, I passed out when I saw blood. Maybe becoming a heart surgeon isn't for me. I know I probably used that example too much, but I mean, being able to pause and reflect is key. And this is something simple that educators can easily implement. It's already in their toolbox as part of the learning process, but then it's providing some of that empowerment for the student, so that when the counselor is able to connect with a student, they're able to pull from this to provide more information, so the counselor isn't starting from scratch. One of the other really cool things that I've seen and heard about at a couple of different schools is where they do career conferences.
Yes.
So changing up the traditional parent-teacher conferences, keeping one day the same, where they get to go talk to their teachers. But then the other day is where they meet with their advisory teacher, who may or may not be the content or career expert in the field of interest, but it doesn't matter. That the student is leading the conference in a series of reflections based off of the courses, and then hopefully also these experiences that are embedded into these courses, so that students can come to this realization and conversation with the adult present, and then be able to decide what happens from here. Well, I was on this path and I've decided this is not what I want to do. And if the advisory teacher is unable to answer those questions, that's a direct connection to, you know what, let me send you to the counselor. But we're decreasing the number of referrals to the counselor and empowering both students and the adults in their household to help guide those decisions. So, I mean, that's just one element of it, but I think it's how we structure these work-based learning experiences, whether or not we're setting this up for success. The other piece of that is the embedded work-based learning, meaning it's part of the course. When we remove work-based learning and have it outside of the school day or the college day, we are creating a system of privilege. If you have the resources, then you get work-based learning. We need to eliminate that. That should never be a factor in determining whether students get these connections and career opportunities to make those informed decisions. So by embedding them into the classroom, we're being really thoughtful about how we're connecting what it is that we're doing to careers, And we're thinking about how we're scaffolding that student learning. What are the on and off ramps? We don't just go from zero to internship. Like, we need to have something in between. Were there classroom speakers? Was there a tour? What does this look like? It doesn't mean we need to have every classroom doing like 50 work-based learning experiences, but we can be thoughtful about what we're connecting students to. The medical field is often like, why is it only nursing and doctors are represented as far as career paths? There's all these other ones. You're right. How are we sharing those? Business partners, how are you relaying that these are important careers, and how are you connecting in to provide those opportunities? It demonstrates rigor and relevance when we embed it, and it provides an inclusive opportunity for students. Plus, our data just got better. We know exactly who's in those courses. We know exactly who's participating and who's not participating. Do we find out there's a particular population that isn't able to access? Then we need to do something about that.
Wow,
that was a mouthful. I'm sorry.
You dropped. No, I mean, it's no need for me to ask another question on that, because like you're just sharing, so you're going in such great depth in your explanation. So I'm really grateful for you breaking that down, and I know it's going to be super valuable to our learning community. I want to close it with this. This is my question I like to ask everyone, and I know you're on the policy board around this work-based learning. So I'm curious your thoughts. What's your vision for the future of career and technical education?
We no longer view CTE as the students who aren't going to college. We're considering them just on this conveyor belt directly to employers. Rather, we re-envision CTE to really be what it's intended to be. We're creating learners who are leaders, who are engaged and understand their skills, their interests, what will make them money, what should be hobbies or maybe side hustles. But we're providing informed students to make clear decisions that are connected to business and industry, with the skill set and the knowledge to make those decisions on the career path. And they are in charge. They are our future leaders. They're making these decisions to help navigate the next stages of their lives, whether that is college or directly in the workforce, because there's no one right path.
Thank you so much, Kristy. Listen, I'm enjoying your book, Transformational Work-Based Learning, Leading Exceptional Internship Programs. I encourage everyone who's listening to go out and get a copy of this. Kristy, for those who have heard this and they're like, listen, we need to bring her in to work with us and get us together, where do you want them to go?
Voleskyconsulting.com. I have a list of my different services. I also have free resources, low cost opportunities, and more advanced opportunities. But yeah, I really look forward to helping schools and colleges, meeting them where they're at, moving the programs forward, and even thinking about how are we creating these multi-system approaches that at the same time streamline, meet all students where they're at to grow them into the best versions of themselves. So happy to help with that program development as well.
Absolutely. I encourage everyone, if you're looking to elevate your work-based learning, Kristy is the go-to resource. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Kristy dropped so many gems on here. Don't be selfish. Share with a friend or a colleague who needs to hear this. And until the next episode, remember, you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Global CTE podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to be the first to know about future episodes.